Tilth is a word that's not used much anymore. It comes from the Old English word tilth, which is spelled in a funny Old English way and meant labor or work, especially the labor or work in the cultivation of the soil, as the Oxford English Dictionary describes it. Examples from the dictionary include, from the year 1580, tilth well done in season due, or from the year 1660, after 4 years' tilth, lay down your land. Today, the word has come to mean the physical condition of the soil and its suitability for planting. Back in the Middle Ages, tilth also had a figurative meaning, the cultivation of knowledge, morality, religion, the mind, etc. In other words, we can cultivate ourselves in a way that good things can grow, similar to how we cultivate the soil to grow great food. The Tilth Alliance in Seattle, Washington embraces all of these meanings of their namesake. It's an organization that grew out of a regional network of organic farmers and gardeners in the Pacific Northwest in the 1970s. Today, they define themselves as a community of farmers, gardeners, and eaters, united in the desire to build a sustainable, healthy, and equitable food future. Carey Thornton has been gardening and teaching classes with Tilth Alliance for many years, and she joins me to talk about the work she and others are doing at Tilth Alliance. We spoke on July 15th, 2022. I'm John Fiege, and this is Chrysalis. You can subscribe at johnfiege.earth, where you will also find show notes and all episodes of the podcast, plus my writing, photographs, and films. On a trip to Seattle, I was able to visit Tilth Alliance's Rainier Beach urban farm and wetlands, which is an amazing oasis and community space in the middle of Seattle. You can see my photographs from Rainier Beach at johnfiege.earth. Here is Carey Thornton. Could you start by telling me a bit about your background and how you came to work with the Tilth Alliance and Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands?
I think I grew up in a family where food was really important. I grew up in Hawaii. The culture of gathering is everybody brings food. We eat lots of food. That's how we celebrate. And so I think joy around food and sharing food has always been part of my life and part of my family culture. Mm-hmm. My mom tells me that she doesn't find it at all surprising that this is the work that I do now, because whenever I went to visit my grandmother's house, I was always in the backyard. Mm. My grandmother had fruit trees, lychee and avocado and guava and oranges and lemons, and also grew annual vegetables. And we would go out and pick fern shoots after the rain. And so those I think are really fond memories of my childhood. And so I think going all the way back to then, not quite the womb, but I feel echoes of that in the work that I do, and growing plants and sharing my knowledge with other people really helps me feel connected to that part of my childhood. But I think the turning point for me in my adult life, I ended up working in the restaurant industry for a long time, cooking in restaurants and bars, and that's hard work. And and you get a bad attitude doing it. And I knew that I couldn't do it forever.
It doesn't make you the person you want to be.
It doesn't. It's work hard, play hard, and usually comes with some chemical addictions for folks. And so I ended up doing AmeriCorps, and basically you become a professional volunteer. And what really stuck with me was like kind of disconnecting the money that I make from the work that I do. And that, I think, really pushed me into the world of nonprofit work. So I worked in school garden, AmeriCorps, and then after that I worked for the WSU Extension, the King County Extension here in Washington, doing nutrition education and garden education in elementary schools. So I did for a lot of years teaching kiddos about like what's a whole grain and planting seeds in classrooms and helping to steward school gardens. And then finally I got a job at Tilth and started teaching adults. So I do a lot of the same work, just teaching adults about growing food in their backyard, learning about ecosystems and how we can steward ecosystems better, utilizing plants for human purposes, like doing food preparation and food preservation and plant medicine and, you know, making compost, all of those types of things. And that is what I do now for most of my job.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands sounds like this really interesting and unique place. It's a 10-acre site focused on organic food production distribution, environmental education, and wetland restoration. And it's also owned by the city of Seattle. Can you tell me more about this place and what it's like to work there?
Yeah, I sure can. It's rad to work there.
It sounds
It's
like
like
it. I
one
was
of
like,
the
why have I never heard of this place before?
yeah, it's one of the best places on earth. It's interesting because it in the city of Seattle, the Parks Department they can't take any park in our neighborhoods out of park use, selling it without replacing it in the same neighborhood, the same amount of land. And so the piece of property that the Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands is on used to serve as the nursery for or one of the nurseries for the parks department. And
Mm,
when they consolidated their nursery practices, this large piece of property in what is now a rapidly developing neighborhood, because it couldn't be sold and it had to be kept within parks, there was a neighborhood group that said, like this piece of property is going into transition. Like, we want a community farm here. And so at that time, it was called Atlantic City Nursery. The Friends of Atlantic City Nursery basically put together like an RFP, like a proposal that says we want to make this space into a community farm that's going to serve our neighborhood.
mm,
And got together with, at that time, the organization that I worked for was called Seattle Tilth. This was over 10 years ago. And they wrote a proposal that said, we want to make this into a community farm. And so this project has been going on in one form or another for about a decade. We've got a few new buildings through some money raised through the Parks Foundation and got some new greenhouses. And so there are different parts of the farm that are being cared for, managed, stewarded in different ways. There's a drainage channel that cuts through, like kind of divides the farm in half. And that drainage canal is actually being restored as a working wetlands.
hmm.
So there's a wetland buffer on either side, and then sort of the south end of the property is being restored to conifer forest. Um, so that's the wetlands restoration part. We also have an orchard of fruit trees that's being stewarded. We have production fields. There's a garden kind of up by the office that is grown and stewarded by a program called Bridges, which works with the Rainier Beach High School students. They're like developmentally disabled folks that are
Hmm.
like transitioning out of high school into the workforce. And
Mm.
so helping support them with job skills. And it's sort of being grown with the horticultural therapist as a lead. And so it's a very special and particular garden, which is a very particular, and intentional way of designing that garden space as well. So there's a lot of cool things happening.
Yeah, that's super cool. You just don't often hear this combination of things of, it's the garden, there are a lot of organic urban gardens out there, but then
Hmm.
you've got all this environmental education, the wetland restoration, and these community programs. Um, how do you think you've been able to put all that under one roof?
I am just one of many people that work at the farm, and there are lots of folks that help to run the programs, to gather volunteers, to um, steward and shepherd engagement of community. And so, because we also have a kitchen and a gathering room, there's a local chef who comes in once a week to he's like gathering food and cooking meals to give out to people through his Feed the People
Mm,
program. And so we're like, it's not just the programming that we as Tilth Alliance or the Friends of Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands are operating, but also connecting with other neighborhood organizations, other folks in the neighborhood that are doing uh, interesting and diverse and important work, and just like collaborating with them and offering the resources that we have. Also a very interesting and diverse and cool neighborhood to live in as well.
yeah, describe that area where it's located for folks who aren't familiar with that part of the country.
Sure, yeah. So it's in a south neighborhood of Seattle, and we're kind of in the neighborhood is called Rainier Beach. It's at the south end of Rainier Avenue. For a long time, the Rainier Beach neighborhood has been a working class neighborhood, historically large African American population, and currently a lot of immigrant families. And then in the last 10 or 15 years or so is undergoing sort of a gentrification. And so the community of the neighborhood has been kind of shifting and changing, and but I think that there's still such a kind of diverse and eclectic, vibrant community here. There's a lot of different cultures that live here. There's a lot of different languages that live here. And, still a lot of like lower income and working class families live here. It's very like dynamic and cool
Cool. And
place.
how
Yeah.
how has that cultural diversity kind of influenced what you're doing on the site and with the gardening? What types of vegetables you're growing? How you approach the work? That kind of thing.
The land that we are on at the Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands, and also most of Seattle, is traditional Duwamish land. So the first people of this place, Duwamish tribes, used, the areas around this neighborhood. The neighborhood next to us, which is called Pritchard Island or Pritchard Beach, actually used to be an island in the lake, and there was a winter camp there. And so, thinking about history of the place and history of what the land has gone through, I think that for me, that really helps to kind of connect to some of those restoration projects, and like thinking about the trauma that the land has felt, and knowing all of the changes that have happened since then. So about 150 years ago, as white settlers came into Seattle and pushed Native people out, there was a lot of displacement and a lot of change that happened to the land with logging and earth moving and hydrology changing. And when the Army Corps of Engineers, so Lake Washington, which is adjacent to the farm, is actually connected to Puget Sound through a waterway that was cut out. And when the Army Corps of Engineers cut and connected that waterway, the lake level dropped about 9 feet.
Oh, wow.
And so the land that the farm is on used to be part of the lake. It used to be underwater, or marshland originally. And so because it's lake bottom, it's like really nice for growing food in.
Right.
There's a lot of nutrients in that soil, and the water table is really high. But we're also really trying to heal some of that land trauma and regrow some of the conifer forest and repair the wetlands. And also, I think your original question was like, how do we integrate some of that, the vibrancy of the neighboring community into the space? And one of the projects that I think about is that there's a group of East African seniors. They helped build out the farm. So when the land, about 10 years ago, we sent out the proposal and then received the permission to be able to start doing programming on the land. Tilth and the Friends of Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands, and through many programs, but specifically with this group of seniors, came out and kind of started clearing out some of the noxious weeds, the reed canary grass, and like really building it into a farm. And they've been with us stewarding this place and having their programming. They do it's part of the senior lunch program. So they, on Wednesdays and Fridays, come and gather. Some folks cook lunch in the kitchen, and then some folks do work out in either the production fields. They have a spot now to steward some food growing areas for like foods that are culturally appropriate to their communities, and then also doing wetlands restoration work too. So they come out for a few hours, work at the farm, and then gather together and eat lunch. And they've been doing it every Friday for about 10 years. And it's become one of, I think, the, like flagship programs of the farm, because everybody knows like about the elders, and it's also draws a lot of media attention. People like the newspaper likes to write stories about them.
Totally.
And some of the actual members of the community, there are some folks that have been there since the very beginning. And it's wonderful to see them, and now are gathering more as it's kind of the program has become more seated in the East African senior community. There's 30 to 40 seniors come on Wednesday sometimes.
Wow. Well, it's so cool to have the intergenerational work happening and having folks who grew up in such a different place in a different time to kind of bring that knowledge and cultural vibrancy to a place.
Oh, yeah.
And here's something that Tilth Alliance wrote about the work y'all are doing. We're working towards a food culture that places the highest value on organic, regenerative, and sustainable farmers and farming, one that promotes a farming industry full of opportunity, possibility, and prosperity. Can you break this down a bit for me? Why is a food culture that places the highest value on organic, regenerative, and sustainable farmers and farming important? And how do you define that kind of organic, regenerative, sustainable? And how is this vision different than what is kind of the world we live in now?
Yeah, man, that's a big question, right? I think the world that we live in now doesn't really place any value on farming whatsoever. Right. I mean, the food that we have that most people have access to in the grocery store is almost hardly recognizable as food. It's been so processed and boxed, and when you think about how a few generations ago, maybe 100 years ago or so, a majority of people knew how to eke out a little bit of food from the ground, or knew a farmer, or had got their food directly from a farmer. And then we've been on this progression of corporate consolidation of farmlands. And so it has become a large sort of capitalistically driven system that's almost unmanageable, I think.
Yeah, it's all about creating cheap and convenient food and creating a lot of profits for the people who make it.
And I think that it feels very scary when something, like we see our food system so unresilient in when the pandemic happened, and there was that big scare where because one of the meatpacking houses had to they didn't want to close the meatpacking houses, even though humans that were working in there were getting COVID. And when finally, they had to close one or two, there was this fear that millions of hogs had to be euthanized because our food system is so unresilient and unflexible because of that efficiency of economy, that there were, just one or two meatpacking houses closed, and the food system couldn't deal with it. I think it's similar with the baby formula issue that was happening, where one factory closed and now we can't feed our babies, right? It feels dramatic to say that, but it's scary.
Well, it's producing at such scale in such a centralized way and using such far-flung distribution networks that, it's a well-oiled machine, but you throw some water in there.
Yeah.
And it can really grind to a halt.
Absolutely. And what happens when it grinds to a halt and we don't have food to eat? So I think one of the big solutions to that is decentralizing. I think one of the things that for me was exciting about what lifted out of the ashes of the pandemic is that we'd see these little mutual aid organizations, people just in neighborhoods doing their own food distribution. So many more people during the pandemic started growing backyard gardens. Restaurants that couldn't open because they couldn't, serve the public, use their kitchen to cook food to distribute for free to the community. And so those little mutual aid organizations and those little communities coming together really to feed each other That's the resiliency. That's where it comes from. And I think that for me, that's where, coming back to your question about, farmers being a really important part of our food system, like laughably critical part of our food system. Why aren't we talking about farmers? They grow all the food for us to eat, right. And farm workers, right? Not just farm landowners, but also farm workers. And who are our farm workers, and how are they being treated, and where are they coming from, and what is their trauma? And then also like the soil and the land that the food is coming from, and how is the soil being treated, and what is its trauma? Like, if we, in large scale agriculture, we just have fields and fields and fields of monocrop, and instead of the work being to develop and encourage soil ecosystems and vibrancy and health within the soil, we are just dropping chemicals on the dirt, like spray herbicides so that nothing can grow but the thing we want to grow, and then so everything else in the soil is like killed. And then where do the nutrients, we killed all the things that create the nutrients for the soil, so now we have to drop nutrients onto the soil, so we're just dropping in nitrogen, and then maybe some of that nitrogen gets picked up by the plant roots, and then the rest ends up going down through the waterways into the Gulf of Mexico, or, right. and causes pollution because it can't all be utilized because our soils are not dynamic and spongy like they used to be. And so anyways, that's the story that I feel from like these sort of larger chemically run farming operations that are really a majority of our food system right now is not working. It's right. Causing more damage than it is, being helpful to like actual humans. When I'm out in the garden with people, some of the work that I do is teaching folks new skills, which I see, like folks are so excited at the end of classes because they just learn something new and they feel really good. We're out in the garden doing a hands-on thing, and then they're like planted a garden bed and they're like, wow, I can do this. I think that is fulfilling. Like when volunteers come and they spent a season or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, and they feel ownership over that land, and they have that relationship through tending of being able to care for something and then have it reward you with a gift, is really fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that makes me think of another thing you all have written is that advocacy, education, and collaboration are your primary strategies in the work you're doing. And again, I was hoping you could kind of break that down a bit and talk about, what is your theory of change for how do we get to this food culture that places the highest value on organic, regenerative, and sustainable farmers and farming?
So, I think advocacy is really important on the highest level. When I think of advocacy, I'm thinking of like legislative work and like how are we changing, or how are we supporting laws and legislation that's going to support our farmers, right? That's like kind of highest level work that folks in this organization are doing to advocate for farmers, to advocate for farmland, to advocate for a more holistic way of treating the ecosystems that grow our food for us, mm-hmm. right? Including plants and humans. I'm not as involved with the advocacy piece. The mm-hmm. other pieces are kind of where my jam is, but the education for me is where I'm in the thick of it. And so like the thing that's most satisfying for me is when I get to learn skills, but also when I get to share those skills with other people that are coming to me because they're craving it. That piece of like, I want to learn how to grow food for my family. I want to learn how to, preserve like all of the apples in the neighborhood that just kind of rain down from the sky and roll into the street. Let's save that. I want to make applesauce. I want to make fruit roll-ups. I want to like can apple pie filling. Let's save it, right? Like, how do we do that? I think all of those pieces. And for me, that education is like as many skills as I can gather and then share out with the people that I see, I think is helpful. That's what fulfills me.
That's cool.
And then the third piece, what's the third piece there?
Collaboration.
Right. And for me, that just means community building, right? So not one of us is going to be able to save the world on our own. We wouldn't want to. Why would you save the world just for yourself? It doesn't make any sense, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, the elements in the system don't exist without the connection between them. Right. And so that feels like the most dynamic. It's the most exciting, farmer to farmer peer education. So they're doing like a farm conference where farmers will gather to listen to other farmers that have solved problems that they're trying to solve. So we, like, for almost 40 years, I think, have put together this farm conference, gathering farmers together and kind of supporting this peer-to-peer education, and also through farm walks, which during the pandemic turned into farm walk podcasts, where farmers can share, their knowledge, their whatever niche of expertise that they has really been working for them, and share it with other farmers. And then also, I think, bridging the gap between consumers and producers. So Tilth Alliance as an organization really has only been around since 2016, but it came out of a merging of Seattle Tilth, Tilth Producers of Washington, and the Cascade Harvest Coalition, all of which were doing food systems work in various ways. And a part of that merger, I think the dream of that merger was to really focus on being able to connect people that produce food with people that consume food, and bridging that, the folks that live out rural and folks that live in the city, and like, how do we connect those pieces? Because we're not like separate entities. We're two sides of the coin, right? Like, we in the city, we can't eat food without farmers, and farmers can't be farmers without having a market for their produce. And so how do we connect those pieces? And so Tilth also has programs. There's a Eat Local First, which is a online platform to connect consumers with, like, if you're in, I think it's Washington, I think it goes across the state, I'm not sure, but if you're looking for like a farmer's market or a farm stand or a U-Pick or a CSA program or a farmer close to you that you can buy in bulk from, there's a platform for that, to be able to find locally produced food close to you.
So in the time you've been in Seattle, do you feel like you've witnessed this food culture that you are hoping for start to emerge more strongly?
I think so. To be honest, I feel like Seattle is a place that has for a long time had that food culture. I've lived in Seattle just for about 25 years. The city of Seattle we, through the Department of Neighborhoods in the city, have a pea patch community gardening program that's been around since the late 70s. I want to say that it's almost 50 years that the program has been running, and there are community gardens that are run by the city. The program is run by the city in like 90 to 100 places around within the city of Seattle. And each of those community gardens, gardeners come together, and sometimes it's just 15 plots, sometimes it's 100 plots. And they each, it's sort of an allotment style garden where, each gardener has their like 10 by 10 plot that they take care of. And then also together they steward the rest of the land, whether it's on a city park or land leased from a church next door or whatever. When I started working at Tilth, which was, almost 15 years ago, they had this program that had already been running for a lot of years. That was like the City Chicken Urban Farm Tour. It's like how neighborhoods do like a garden tour where you buy a ticket and you get a map, you go look at other people's gardens, but it was with chicken coops.
Oh, wow.
In the city.
Yeah, we had that in Austin too.
Yeah. And that, and so I think that within the city of Seattle, the culture has been there for a while. And, there's ebb and flows. I think that there's kind of flux to that. But I think the idea is, as the rest of the world gets weirder and again, a corporate consolidation of farms and chemical ownership of farms, as the rest of the world gets weirder, we have to fight harder. And And that connection to rural farming communities becomes more important. And I think in Seattle, there are a lot of people that have been growing food in their backyard for a long time, but with more urban density, less available space, it's harder and harder for and a lot more people that just don't have homes are houseless in this city.
Right.
We have more humans here. So how do we get more like housing for humans, but also still have space to be able to grow food in the city? That's an ongoing conflict. And so there's just like, I think as a culture, Seattle has for a long time had this spirit of really valuing organic food production. But how do we continue to maintain that with that priority with all of the other things,
Right,
all the other
right.
things?
Yeah, and I imagine that in your work, you're very focused on the communities and what's happening there. But, I wonder how much you think about the broader context. For example, I'm thinking about how industrial agriculture consumes more and more of the Earth's forests to convert them into production of monocultures and animals for slaughter, that kind of thing. I mean, there is kind of a unique situation in Seattle where you've got the climate and the soil and the cultural diversity and the density and the wealth. It kind of makes it's kind of like the perfect conditions for the kind of work you're doing in a sense. And sometimes I look at places like that. I'm like, oh, this is amazing, but I have a hard time thinking about like how does this travel? How does it scale? How is it replicated elsewhere? Do you think about those questions at all?
Yeah. It does kind of, sometimes feel hopeless when you look at like, I live in this little bubble and like this green bubble.
Right.
And then
right.
the rest of the world is fucked or whatever, I definitely, feel that. And even within the city, like, of course it's not perfect, but I think for me, it's something that I've been learning about through like Adrienne Marie Brown. I don't know if you know her, but this idea of like, we are like tessellations, right? So like this little spot that I'm doing work in, and I can change this little piece. And then those things that are connected to it change the piece that's bigger. And those things that are connected to it change the piece that's bigger. And so the work that we do is rippling out in kind of waves or in branching patterns to get to these other things. And so even though it feels kind of sometimes hopeless to get to like the main thing or to get to the biggest part of it, I really believe, the way that I think about things is like designing like nature. And so there are these little systems that are nested within bigger systems that are nested within bigger systems. And so work that I'm doing in my house is going to affect the work that's happening in my neighborhood, which is going to affect the work that's happening in my city, which is going to affect the work that's happening in my county, which is going to affect the work that's happening in my state, right? And so it just like these nested systems, I think that there is a big piece that has to happen from the biggest perspective, again, advocacy, but also that this like grassroots are trickling up, because if you're just doing one thing from the top down, that consolidation, it doesn't work. We've seen it doesn't work.
Yep.
And
it's so
how
easy.
We have to euthanize millions of hogs because it doesn't work.
Right. And I think part of that that kind of nested system of cascading effects, it's sometimes difficult for us to trust in it because it's out of our control. And we come from this culture where we like to control everything so much. And it's so easy for us to say like, there's this huge system that has so much money and so much power and political influence, and there's no way we can ever influence it. So we might as well not try. But that's very disempowering. But I do like that approach of like, I'm going to do this thing here that I have access to well, and I'm going to trust in this idea that if a lot of people do that, those ripples lead to something that we can't imagine or control. But that are far better than resigning yourself to what seems like an insurmountable system.
Yeah. Well, we all have good days and bad days.
And what are some of the biggest challenges you face in your work?
I mean, I think that thing that you're talking about is real. The feeling somewhat hopeless about things sometimes. You like do your best, and you are trying to live your best life, and realizing that like, oh, I am in a bubble, or like, I think looking at that, the influence of the grandest picture can be debilitating sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
And then also the real things like grant funding, and like how do we get money in the nonprofit world? Like, how do we get the money to do the things that we want to do? And is it the right thing to do? And working with diverse communities, there's always like thinking about like representation and like who has the right to be doing the work. And one of the things about a real thing about the Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands is Tilth is a historically and currently our white-led organization in a diverse and also rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, and that feels uncomfortable. And what is the work that, like, how can we be real about what we're trying to do and not imposing something into a place, or tokenizing somebody, or speaking from a place that isn't authentic, or making the wrong decisions. Like, I think that is a real issue too, in specifically in the work that we're doing there, in kind of all food systems work, I think.
Yeah. And are there things you feel like you've learned in struggling through those questions?
Still learning, still learning. I think I learned from somebody just recently that when thinking about social justice work and racial justice within the food systems and all of that, I think the first thing you have to do is acknowledge the trauma. And that really resonated with me. I think that our country, our food system, the wealth of the United States is built off of like stolen land, off the backs of stolen people.
Right.
And if we don't acknowledge that, then we can't move forward at all.
Right. Right.
And then also acknowledging that, like, okay, so that if that's the wrong way to do things, we're continuing to do that. We're continuing down that wrong path, right? So how do we unlearn those wrong ways to do things and try to listen to land tenders from indigenous cultures that have had connections to their land for thousands of years? Like, that's a very different way of growing food. That's a very different way of tending the land. That's a very different way of stewarding than how Americans have been doing it for the last, 400 years.
Right.
And so I think that's a big part of the piece too. And something that I'm not as articulate about as I would like to be, but also still learning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a process, and being engaged in the thinking and the struggling and the questioning is what it's all about, really. And can you share any stories of people you've witnessed who've had, I don't know, what you might call transformative experiences at one of your gardens or farms or workshops?
Oh, gosh. Well, my friend Anita, this is her story. I just want to put that out there, that
Okay.
so that this is a story that I heard from her. And obviously it's my filter through my head. But she took a composting class from me, and then she kept coming to classes, and then eventually started volunteering. And then now she actually works with Tilth. She manages a program called Soil and Water Stewardship Program, which is a volunteer training program, intensive training program. She also stewards a learning garden in East King County, in Kirkland at McAuliffe Park, and is really focused on engaging the East County community. She's originally from South India. There's a big Indian community in East King County, and so she's trying to get them engaged in land stewardship and feeling connected to the earth. And my understanding is that like a lot of the Indian community is, you know, like a lot of folks that work in like tech and medical industry, and you know that and they're very kind of separated from like thinking about growing a garden or thinking about their energy usage or thinking, you know. And so I think for her to see changes in her community around like climate awareness and, you know, lowering plastic usage and those types of things, like really sparking and exciting for her, and feels like she's doing a really good thing. And that she roots that from like one composting class that she took from me like a bunch of years ago.
That's amazing.
Like feels amazing for me, you know?
Right. Yeah, you go take a composting class so you can transform your community's perception of big environmental issues.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you know, like what 99.99% of that is just like her being driven.
Right.
And then there's that like 0.001% was that composting class she took from me.
But that's the spark.
But that's the spark. And,
so
and you know, when she tells that story, that's what like feeds me. Like that's what makes it feel worth it. That like one thing that I did that I don't even remember that class. It was a bunch of years ago, but that shifted something for her, you know? And I don't know, that's as much as we can hope for, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, that kind of leads to the next thing I was going to talk to you about, which is, you know, what does this work mean to you personally, and what keeps you going when things are hard?
Yeah. I mean, that story helps.
Yeah.
But that she's like a really good friend of mine now, and that we get to have connections consistently around things like plant medicine and picking roses and making pickles, and co-teaching, you know, programs together, I think. But also ultimately I'm a plant nerd, and I just like to be in the garden. I like to watch things grow, and I like to look at bugs, and I like to make food come out of the ground. I mean, those are the real things. I think being out in the garden and like just being able to like listen to the birds and get excited about the beetles and be curious about a green caterpillar thing that ends up being a hoverfly larva that's eating all my aphids, like and tending a piece of land that I am building a connection with, that I've been able to have a relationship with for almost 10 years, and then invite people, volunteers, students to come to that land and invite them to have a relationship with it. That feels like what life is supposed to be about for me. So,
well, yeah. And I feel like that's not insignificant in the context of this world we built, where, you know, many people work in air-conditioned, fluorescently lit offices, staring at screens for way too many hours a day. And, you know, that connection to living things has really been pushed out of our daily lives for, you know, the vast majority of people.
Yeah. You know, it's our genetic inheritance. As humans, we've evolved to be out in the ecosystem, out in the forest, out in the prairie, you know, like out in the waters. And only in the last, I mean, with the screens and that sort of technology, it's so new. That's one generation, right? But even within like air conditioning or living indoors most of the time, that's really only a few generations. And when you think about how long humans have evolved to be part of the ecosystem, and then this like weird, awkward thing that we're doing right now is such a small part of our like physical evolution that our bodies are not prepared for it. Like we're broken, and we're like riddled with disease, and our mental health is just like, it's alarming, right? A collective mental health. like, I think when people come and they plant a seed or they harvest a thing and they like pull a carrot out of the ground and like, wipe the dirt off on your pants and then just eat it. It is so satisfying because you're reminded that like, that's what we're supposed to be. That's what our bodies are supposed to be doing. This other thing is new and it's awkward and it's uncomfortable, and we push out of our mind how uncomfortable it is. But when you go into like the forest, or you go into the ocean, or you go into a garden and you taste a leaf, it feels like mind-blowingly satisfying sometimes, because you're like, oh right, this is what my body is supposed to be doing.
It's therapy. It's healing.
Yeah.
No, and yeah, we need to figure out a way to reorient our societies so we all can do that more, and not just go further and further into, the metaverse.
Yeah.
the
The
screen, the
metaverse is so
screenverse.
weird. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people won't be familiar with the term tilth. And in addition to it being title, I heard you use the word. Can you describe what that word means and how you use it?
Yeah. Tilth, my understanding, is an Old English word that is like the quality of good cultivated soil. And that is like literally the base, the ground that this organization springs from, right? And when we focus on organic, sustainable, regenerative agriculture, really it springs from the health of the soil. And that tilth, when you say like, my soil is in good tilth, it means that it's vibrant. It's filled with life. It's filled with a soil ecosystem that even if we can't see it with our eyes, we know it's there because the smell of the earth, the feel of the texture, it's got a crumbly texture, right? And then that word to describe soil can also be extended to describe our communities. If your community is, it's, metaphor for the community too. If your community is in good tilth, it means that the connections are vibrant. You've got diversity of folks there doing lots of different things that are, every base is covered. We're all resilient because if I can't do it, that other person can. Or if I don't have a thing, that other person can share. And so I think it's a good metaphor for community as well as like a literal term that describes soil.
Well, how can listeners get involved or support some of the work you're doing at the Tilth Alliance or Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Wetlands, or other programs you're involved in? Folks, listeners both inside and outside of Seattle.
Yeah. So if you're inside Seattle, you can always come volunteer with us, come take a class, join a program. Obviously, donate, and you can help fund the work that we do with your monetary dollars. We always love that. Join us for events. But even outside of Seattle, I think the thing really is for me, like, get involved in your food system. Wherever you are, try growing a little food. Even if you live in an apartment with like a south-facing window, you can grow a little something in a pot on your windowsill. You can cook more at home. You can go to the farmer's market. You can buy a CSA. You can try to find local producers in your area. You can shop at the co-op. I think however it is that you feel called to get more involved in your own food system, even if it's just cooking one more meal from scratch at home a week, just reclaim it, get involved, reclaim it, value local producers, value organic, regenerative, sustainable producers, and see how it feels to grow some of that food yourself, because it's really satisfying. The other thing is, even if I don't grow all of the lettuce that I'm going to eat for my family, because I had that experience of growing that lettuce, I know how hard it is. I know what it takes. I'm going to be more willing to pay $5 for the farmer's market organic head of lettuce than I am if I hadn't done that. I understand the value of that. So I think it all feeds together.
Yeah, and have faith in those ripple effects that might come from the small acts that you might never even know about.
Yeah, there's a little bit of faith there for sure.
Well, great. Carey, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been great.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for letting me talk.
Thank you so much for listening to the Chrysalis Podcast. Please subscribe at johnfiege.earth, where you can also find show notes and all episodes of the podcast, plus my writing, photographs, and films. I want to send a very special thank you to all of our paid subscribers. Your membership allows us to grow, flourish, and remain free and ad-free for everyone. Your belief in the work that we're doing and your generous support mean the world to me and the podcast team. Thank you.